Everybody, so when you begin to speak, just make sure you unmute yourself. Good afternoon and welcome back to the Food to Institution Summit. Session 2 will begin shortly. Please note that this session will be recorded. I have already muted all of the participants, and if you would, please turn your camera off until after all presentations have ended. You are welcome to use the chat function throughout the presentation, as well as the hand raising feature during the Q&A portion at the end of this session. Both are located in your toolbar, either at the top or bottom of your screen. The moderators will be following the chat to ensure questions are addressed as time permits. If you prefer to ask questions, please use the hand raise feature and a moderator will call upon you to turn your camera on and unmute yourself. Again, welcome to the Farm to Institution Summit. Thank you for the time.
Good afternoon and welcome to session 2 of our Farm to Institution Summit, Institutional Procurement of Local Foods. We're very glad that you've joined us this afternoon. In today's session, we'll have 3 guest speakers that will be covering topics such as growing your program, key concepts, challenges, and solutions. After these presentations, our student graduate intern, Tiffany Harvey, will be doing a slide deck or slideshow of the Ohio farm. And then following that, we will actually have question and answer sessions where you can ask questions. Along the way during the presentations, feel free to join in the chat, put your questions in there. Once we get to the question and answer series, then we'll go through all those questions. And like Nikki said, if you'd like to ask your question personally, then don't be afraid to raise your hand. Our first guest speaker, Lilian Brislen, is director of the University of Kentucky's Food Connection, a local food systems center at the University of Kentucky. The work of the Food Connection focuses on the study and development of regional food systems and best practices in developing farm to student value chains. Dr. Brislen holds a PhD in rural sociology from the University of Kentucky, and her primary interests are sociology of agriculture, political ecology, and diverse economies. She is the land grant lead on multi-year initiative with the USDA to develop and disseminate harmonized local food metrics. Other current research includes a second cooperative initiative with USDA AMS focused on the impacts of COVID on local and regional food systems, a Southern SARE funded project looking at development of non-commodity small grain value chains, and a pilot initiative to build equitable and inclusive healthy food hubs with healthcare facilities in Appalachian, Kentucky. In her spare time, Lily enjoys working to restore a 115-year-old home in downtown Lexington and walking her dog, Crowder P. Please welcome Dr. Lilian Brislen.
Thank you so much for that introduction. If anyone knows a good plumber in Lexington, please let me know. Such a pleasure to be here with y'all today. I can't see the chats, but my colleagues are going to keep me honest. The way we decided to structure this session today is I'm going to give some of the nuts and bolts of Farm to Institution, not knowing who's in the room. You may be brand new to this, and there's a lot of terms, there's a lot of ins and outs. It's very learnable. You can get into this work, but it's helpful to have an overview. So that's mostly what I'm going to do today. Not talk too much about what specifically has happened at UK, but I'm happy to connect with anyone offline to go more in depth into that story. And there's some Civil Eats articles you'll see. So that's me. Thank you all for this opportunity. I should also say that my very first job out of college, I tell everyone this, was as an AmeriCorps Vista with Rural Action, working with Tom Redfern at the Sustainable Ag program. So it's good to be virtually back home. Okay, let me see if I can change this. Great. Okay, so why am I here talking about University of Kentucky, or why should you care about what I have to say? So back 6-7 years ago, the University of Kentucky privatized its dining services, and I'll talk about what that means in a second, and signed up with Aramark as our dining service provider. And in that contract, not only were there funds included for the creation of the Food Connection, so thanks contract for my dream job, it also had explicit KPIs, and you'll learn these terms in this presentation, key performance indicators for local purchasing. Awesome. Have to do it. We have to have local food. And if you think about, okay, how do we define local food? All of this is a long con to convince you all that having clear metrics and benchmarks is essential for any successful program. But we had Kentucky Proud, which is similar to Ohio Proud, a state-run branding program. So we're going to have Kentucky Proud purchases can count towards local, and anything from within Fayette County, which is where Lexington is, highlighted there in red, and contiguous counties, sort of that super local food miles-based definition. Sounds great on surface, right? And a lot of programs define their local this way. Well, didn't go really according to plan the first time around. So we have a Coca-Cola bottling plant in Lexington. We have an ice manufacturer, and those definitions were inherited from when we were self-operating, and but didn't meet, let's say, the spirit of what our community thought local food can and should be. And so this is a cautionary tale of nothing really went wrong, right? We could have the conversations of the community, correct course, and you'll see that we've been able to be very successful thanks to clear metrics, good partnerships, and a lot of transparency. And the fix really was metrics. So this is that Civil Eats article I'm mentioning, gives a much more of a rundown on our program here. We moved from having a simply miles-based definition of local food to a two-part metric system that distinguishes between local foods that have a farm impact, meaning they have ingredients from local suppliers, Kentucky-based food producers, and things with business impact. Let's say a locally roasted coffee or products that have had significant value adding in the state. We have bread manufacturers that are national brands, but they have baking plants here. So we distinguish between those products. And that is really where the rubber hit the road for us when it came to our local procurement initiative. Since refining the metrics, we have invested over $9 million through the course of our dining contract into local food producers, both farm impact and business impact. We've seen a 6-fold increase in the number of GAP certified farmers in our state, and we've done some really cool other things along the way too. So that's me, that's our work, very briefly. Here's the nuts and bolts of Farm Institution. Welcome to Farm Institution 101. First step, if you're getting into this work, and the context that we're hearing about here, there are 3 main types of dining contracts, especially at higher ed institutions, although a lot of this also applies to healthcare. Self-operating, often shortened to self-op, means that the institution owns and operates the dining services. So all of those procurement policies around all those decisions about what to buy from whom are determined by that institution and its dining service, and the revenues generated by that service are kept within the institution. The employees are employees of the institution. So there's potential for a lot more autonomous decision making, or at least it's all held within that institution. There are things called management contracts, and this is most common in healthcare facilities that they participate in what's called a group purchasing organization. We won't get into the complexities of that. These are really variable, varies by institution to institution, but there is still more control over procurement or setting different types of policies by that institution. And then very common and increasingly common in higher ed in particular are dining service contracts like we have here at UK, where you hire a third-party dining service manager. These are often publicly traded corporations that operate in multiple venues like corrections, K through 12, hospitals. Procurement policies, employment, revenues are all managed and held within that corporation. For us, I think I said it's Aramark. And any sort of procurement initiatives around, and by that I mean local food in particular, or other sustainability goals, are most effective when they are written into the contract. So when that RFP, request for proposals, goes out, having a highly engaged public on and off campus community that makes it clear what the desired outcomes from that dining service contract are is key, because if it's not in the contract, I would offer it's not likely to happen. So And you'll see the Ohio State University is in a self-op situation. And so we're going to get to see some of the differences in the course of today. I just want to say a brief mention here on price. Again, if you're getting into farm to institution work, most of the time what you hear is, oh, the local food's expensive, right? And they have this idea of looking at farmers market prices, which are direct to consumer retail prices. This is a wholesale market, right? This is institutional dining. And the perception is that there's no way local food is cost competitive with conventionally globally sourced commodity products. And that's just simply not always the case. In the height of the season or with some creative value chain strategies, local food can be competitive, if not more cost efficient. And it just takes that relationship building and education on all sides of the value chain to say, here's what we grow well. Here's how we can work around getting, if we can have a long-term agreement, we can be more flexible on price. And there's more than just price when it motivates people. So often the first roadblock put up is price, but it actually comes down to concerns over seasonal availability. Can I get this product consistently? Concerns over meeting certification standards, concerns over how much work it would take to source them. So do not be dissuaded by the initial, it costs too much. And the final thing I want to say is we've seen here at the University of Kentucky, when we look at institutional dining, it's not item cost that ultimately matters. It's what we have as plate cost, especially in the all you care to eat facilities where you just swipe and you go and eat what you care to eat. They're looking at the total place cost. So you can splurge a little bit on one piece that's a gorgeous seasonal fruit, let's say, and accommodate in other areas where you're not doing local procurement. So there are a lot of ways to get beyond the price barrier. All right, move your meat. So the other thing that's important to know when getting into institutional dining is the complexity, not insurmountable, but solutions for local procurement need to work for all of the players involved, the farmers, the distributors, the institutional dining providers, the chefs. And this is the work of value chain coordination is the work of building relationships and building understanding and coherence across that value chain. And a lot of that comes down to procurement. So don't be overwhelmed, but here's a slide that shows this took me about 3 years of working in this role to start to understand the way that institutional dining supply chains work. I'm not going to go through this whole thing. You could have this presentation afterwards, but understanding the different factors that influence the types of decisions that your stakeholders, your procurement directors, the distributors they work with are constrained by or incentivized by really helps you talk their language, understand the structures that they're working with, and come up with solutions that are viable. So if we look on the right-hand side here, right, we see in the orange, local farms and businesses, approved vendors. This is dining service language. The reason lots of folks say, well, why can't they, this like mythical institution, just buy directly from our farmers? And the answer is, well, there are contracts in place that dictate who is a approved distributor and who is outside of that. They're constrained, especially in dining service contracts, by those regulations. There can be ways around it, especially if there's strong public stakeholder. That's the lightning bolt, especially if there's a lot of pressure on the institution to figure it out. But it's not as simple as just getting out your checkbook and signing a check, right? And we can, those of us who are passionate about farm and institution can certainly feel frustrated or constrained by those constraints, but it doesn't make them go away. And understanding and working within those systems and placing pressure where appropriate is a great strategy. And that really comes to a lot of folks, and my previous work is based in food hubs, right? Local food aggregators who specialize in that place. This is another piece of language that's useful to have in your back pocket. There are 3 types of distributors primarily, or the ways that institutional dining thinks about it. We have your broadline distributor. This is, the quick shorthand is whoever you can get carrots and napkins from, right? They're bringing you everything. They're bringing you toilet paper, you're bringing you chicken nuggets. Those are the big, heavily negotiated contracts. Cisco, a major distributor, has an office inside the Aramark corporate headquarters. That's how close and highly negotiated those relationships are. Then you'll have your secondary distributor, who is typically the produce vendor, who's more closely located to the account. So these are more regional. They're buying out of terminal markets. And these are fresh, perishable products, not exclusively, but they supplement what the broadline does. And then there are direct purchases where the dining account is purchasing directly from the vendor. And those of us in local food will often go, aha, so they can do direct purchasing. So why aren't they buying my carrots from Farmer Sally? That's not where direct purchases are leveraged. Direct purchases typically happen when it's such a large buy that it makes sense to negotiate a contract outside of the broadline distributor. So at our institution, that's typically coffee, because college students need a lot of coffee to cram for finals, which we're in the finals week right now, and milk, right? That's direct purchasing directly from the milk vendor. It's not to say it can't be used for other activities, but it goes against the incentive structures and the contract. So it's not as simple as just, well, they should just do a direct purchase. There's some ways to get there, but it's a little different. Okay, so given that these are the systems and the constraints that we're operating within, but also the opportunities, what would we say are some strategies, secrets, and successes? This is what we've seen here in Kentucky. I think the rest of today will bear this out, that community buy-in and sort of advocacy and accountability, both from on and off campus stakeholders, that's it. It sort of starts and ends there. If the community doesn't care, why would the institution do it? And public relations, good press, telling good stories, making connections, making relationships helps all of that work better. It helps folks gain an understanding of the value of these sorts of programs instead of just saying, buy local, why though? Help it make sense for me by cultivating champions and relationships within the institution and outside in the food system. As you saw early in the presentation, clear goals and metrics, knowing what target we're aiming for is essential, which lets you, if you have clear metrics and targets, that lets you engage in strategy planning and commitment. So we can build over time. We can start where we are and say, okay, we don't have much produce in the dining halls. How can we set an internal goal and set a strategy to help us work towards that? And number 5 here, transparency feeds back into number 1. You'll see that we give a report every year to our community, our dining procurement reports. It says, this is what we did with local procurement last year. This is how our dining service performed relative to those KPIs. Here's the new initiatives in place. These are some of the impacts we're seeing. Here are some areas for growth. And they put it in the newspaper every year. The reporter's calling me asking when the dining service procurement report will be out. And folks contact me. We're 6-7 years in. I can't remember at this point. So it's still of interest. We maintain part of the public conversation. It's not a one and done. It's not like you get that contract and it's over. It's a marathon. And tell your story. And that's why I'm honored to be here today to share some of our story here in Kentucky, telling folks again why this matters helps it continue to matter. So you don't go from 0 to 100 that quick. So it's okay to start with baby steps, right? If you're working on that step of building relationships, getting interest, getting buy-in, building an advocacy base, start with sampling and tasting. This is great, especially in public schools. You can have a produce of the month where people get used to experiencing local seasonal vegetables, seeing some farmers, and you can also look at special events. Catering is a great way to introduce vendors into a system, get folks excited about it. Sporting events, we've learned, are a really cool way to bring in local entrepreneurs. And then you can build up over time to dig in, have semi-regular food programming, integrate just one item into a salad bar. You can do a station takeover. And then when you go up for your RFP for dining services, or when you can have some negotiations with your self-op system, get those KPIs in. You've worked out your value chains. You know you have the supply there. You have your baseline of what your procurement looks like, and you can build more strategic partners after that. So this is one last sort of orienting to the world of farm to institution. A lot of us are in this world because we really love local food systems, especially local food producers. And maybe we're coming to it. I certainly came out of the direct-to-consumer realm, farmers markets, CSAs. The Chester Hill Produce Auction was one of my first ever jobs to work on. It's not so simple as plugging those folks into wholesale markets. It's a different game. It's often a scaling up for those sorts of enterprises and a great way to scale up a portion of their enterprise. But it's a different skill set. It's a different sort of packing and handling. There's more logistics involved. And it's not for everyone. It's not necessarily an end goal that everyone wants, but that for producers who are interested in that sort of wholesale volume, it's important to put a strategy in place or to help folks understand what they're getting into and find the right fit markets for the right producer. And then finally, my text a little delayed. I'm going to just close by saying, please have local food metrics. I will circle back to this. There's a whole Farm Institution Metrics Collaborative. We have a harmonized suite of metrics that these are attributes of local food products. We have databases. It's well beyond the scope of this presentation. But those metrics set you up to do the sort of public reporting I talked about. Our website has all of our past years of these reports, so you can see our story more in depth if you're interested. And this just sums up what I was talking about. Start where you are, have relationships and accountability. And there's a whole community nationwide and beyond of Farm Institution folks and our Farm Institution Metrics Collaborative in particular that is welcoming. We're always sharing ideas and resources. And a whole website. So I'll share these links in the chat. I know this was a really quick deep dive into it, but hopefully you have some more vocabulary and information now that we can help then to learn the other stories that will be shared. So thanks so much, and I will turn it back if I can get out of here. I am unaccustomed to Teams. How do I stop sharing? There. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Lilian. That was very informative. Nicely done. Okay, moving to our next speaker. Our guest speaker is on video. Her name is Erin Robb. She was our former procurement and contracts manager, and she did a lot of really good work with the governor's A&E mandate and also with the contracts involved. So Brant, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I am here today to talk to you a little bit about local food procurement at Ohio University. Next slide. So, as many of you know, procuring local food for a large institution can be a challenge. And when you throw in all of the rules and regulations surrounding government procurement, it can create even more obstacles to the process of procuring local food. So in this presentation, I'm going to go over some of the most significant challenges that Ohio University has faced in the procurement of local food and address the solutions and the strategies that we have found to help overcome those obstacles. Next slide. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is quantities and traceability, and we can go to the next slide. So first, to talk about quantities, obviously the board dining operations at Ohio go through large quantities of food. I've listed a couple examples there on the slide: 30,000 gallons of milk, 50,000 heads of romaine, 35,000 pounds of ground beef, and 300,000 shell eggs is approximately what we go through in a year on those products. But of course, those are only 4 out of hundreds and hundreds of individual meat, produce, dairy products that we procure every year. So one of the challenges with local is that many local providers may not be able to provide the large quantities that we require at OU. Next slide, please. In addition to the fact that some of the local farms in southeastern Ohio may not be able to provide those large quantities that I discussed, there's also a concern specifically in Southeast Ohio. It may not be a concern in some of the other regions represented here, but in Southeast Ohio, we tend to have smaller farms. And there is also a concern that if Ohio University were to pull large amounts of products from these local farms, that it could cause a shortfall in the general community. not enough product at farmers markets and things like that for community members to buy. So that is also a concern surrounding quantity here at Ohio University. Next slide, please. So one question that we are often asked is, so if the local providers can't produce these large quantities, can't you just buy what they have and then supplement whatever else is needed from larger suppliers? And that is a great question. And one of the obstacles that arises surrounding that is the idea of traceability. So I'll be talking about traceability next. We can go to the next slide. So here at Ohio University, we have something called the Central Food Facility. And basically, this Central Food Facility is a centralized production facility. And much of the food that is served in our board dining venues is processed out of CFF. And centralized production is great in a lot of ways for sustainability. It reduces food waste and it reduces energy and water consumption. So it's a really good choice and really good model for us. In general. However, it does create one additional obstacle having to do with traceability, and that is because production facilities are more closely regulated and more stringently regulated than other types of food facilities. We could go to the next slide. So most dining facilities, local restaurants, dining halls, things like that are regulated by the local health department. However, CFF, because it is a production facility, is regulated by the Department of Agriculture. So that's where the more stringent rules come in surrounding regulation. So to keep Ohio customers safe and to adhere to regulatory requirements, food processed at CFS must be traceable back to its point of origin. Next slide, please. Traceability can become difficult at CFF if product received from larger distributors is mixed in with products from local producers. So when we receive products from the big suppliers, they obviously have super stringent traceability. If we go just throwing in a couple heads of romaine lettuce from a small farmer and with the many heads of romaine lettuce from a big supplier, then if we need to trace back to the point of origin because of, God forbid, a foodborne illness, it becomes very difficult for us to do that if we've just sort of mixed everything together from the big suppliers and the local suppliers. Next slide, please. So the question is, how do we overcome that? How do we get past the traceability concern and the quantity concerns and still figure out a way to provide local food to our customers? Next slide, please. So the way that Ohio has gone about addressing this mostly is to try to identify niche opportunities to incorporate local food. And if we go to the next slide, we can look at a couple of those. Some examples of these sort of niche areas for local offerings are our Fall Fest. So every fall, at least prior to COVID, we've had something called Fall Fest where we have a bunch of different products made out of apples, some just regular apples, and then a lot of stuff incorporating apples, and then also apple cider. And it's this little festival where we get to have lots of different offerings to our customers. And we've procured those apples and that cider from local farms for many years now. Another example is Latitude 39. Latitude 39 is our full service sit down restaurant. So at Latitude 39, we have incorporated some menu options that have local ingredients. Another example is our retail offering. So we have a variety of retail locations. We have a large marketplace. We have some C-store type markets, coffee shops, and we have found that those can often be a good venue for providing local food options to customers. Next slide, please. In addition, the Farm to Ohio Working Group, which is called FOG, has worked closely with local farms to help gain GAP certification. So GAP stands for Good Agricultural Practices. And by helping these local farms obtain the GAP certification, we can ensure that those local farms have the safety and the traceability standards that we need to keep Ohio customers safe. Next slide, please. So the next obstacle that I'm going to talk about is pricing. We can go to the next slide. As many of you know, local products can often be higher priced than products from larger distributors. And when you're talking about board meal plans, we really have an obligation to keep food costs as low as possible, so we can keep board meal plan rates as low as possible and not keep increasing those too much year after year. So we really have to keep a close eye on price when it comes to board meal plans and food costs. Next slide, please. So how do we incorporate local offerings when you have to keep such a close eye on food cost? Next slide. Our retail operations, we have found, provide a unique opportunity to showcase local products in an environment where customers can choose to pay a little more. So on the board meal plan side, again, we want to keep those food costs low, but in our many retail locations, we can offer local products for sale, and then the individual customer can decide, do I want to pay a little more because it's a priority for me to get something local or not, of course. So we found that that's a great outlet for a lot of these local products. Next slide, please. We launched something in 2016 called the Uniquely Ohio program, and the Uniquely Ohio program is basically a marketing campaign that directs customers to local offerings within those retail venues. So there's a bunch of signage and a specific section within many of these retail operations where folks who are interested in purchasing local items can very clearly see what items are local and be directed towards those for their purchases. Next slide. All right, the final thing that I will talk about today are government procurement rules. Next slide, please. As many of you know, government procurement rules can impose additional obstacles to the procurement of local food. In Ohio, the two main challenges that we have are the $50,000 bid limit and something called the affordability and efficiency mandate. Next slide, please. So the $50,000 bid limit hasn't been too much of an obstacle for us. Most of our local spend with an individual provider has been under $50K per year, so we don't have to worry about bidding at that point. And there are some examples, however, of providers who can give us more than $50K worth of product a year, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. So for those high volume purchases of local food, we have had success working with our awarded vendors. So we have an awarded vendor for produce and an awarded vendor for meat who are bigger suppliers, but we have been able to work through them to partner with local producers of food to purchase those items through the larger distributor. And then we don't have to worry about the $50,000 bid limit because those awards are already in place with those larger suppliers. Next slide, please. The next part to talk about is the affordability and efficiency mandate. This is something that everyone in Ohio knows about, but I think we have some people joining who are probably outside of Ohio. The affordability efficiency mandate came down from the governor's office a couple years ago, and it requires public institutions to utilize large, often statewide contracts whenever possible. So large contracts, these big university-wide or even statewide procurement contracts are rarely awarded to small farmers when it comes to food, and that is because of the quantity and volume limitations that I've already spoken about. So it's very rare that these big contracts would be awarded to a local farmer. Next slide, please. So here at Ohio University, and I think every university in the state probably handles this a little differently, but here at Ohio University, we have instituted an exception process. So everybody follows the A&E mandate very stringently, but there is a process if you have a unique circumstance for requesting and receiving an exception to the mandate. So we know that local food is really important. It's important to us in culinary services. We know it's important to many of our customers. We know it's important to the local community. So Culinary Services has sought and received an A&E mandate exception for local food purchases so that we can continue to make those purchases even though they're often not on these large shared contracts that the A&E mandate wants us to utilize. Next slide, please. So that's basically it for me. I want to thank everybody for your time, and I want to wish everybody good luck with your local food procurement. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Erin, for that pre-recorded message. We do appreciate, and Erin knows that I do appreciate her. I thanked her before she left. Next up, we have Brian Snyder, and he's Executive Director of the Initiative for Food and Agriculture Transformation, INFACT, at the Ohio State University. INFACT is a transdisciplinary program aimed at designing and implementing food systems that are sustainable, defined as achieving a balance of ecology, economy, technology, and culture to promote the overall well-being of people, animals, and the natural environment. Previously, Brian served as Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Association of Sustainable Agriculture, one of the leading sustainable agriculture organizations in the nation, and the William J. Gold Associates, which operates Gold Farm, a 700-acre sustainable farm and mental health treatment facility in Western Massachusetts. He currently sits on the advisory board of the Resnick Center for Food Law and Policy at UCLA School of Law, and served for 2 years in the past as president of the Pennsylvania State Council of Farm Organizations. In his spare time, Brian enjoys fly fishing, cooking, writing, and puttering on his small farm in central Pennsylvania. Please welcome Brian Snyder.
Thank you for that introduction, and hi everyone. I'm going to share my screen here, assuming it works. Okay, do you all see my screen at this point?
Yeah, you're good, Brian.
Okay, thank you. So I'm very glad to follow the two speakers that came before me because they laid a lot of groundwork and provided a lot of definitions that I don't have to repeat here. Basically, I'm going to report to you on the process that we went through at Ohio State to implement a 40% purchasing policy. That would be 40% of the food being from local and or sustainable sources, with the intent of achieving that goal by 2025. I'm not able to advance it. Let me see if I can figure that out. Okay, there we go. So here's a basic timeline of what we went through. The goal was established in 2015. And I would have to say that this was at the time of and followed by very significant pressure from students within the university to act on this. In April of 2016, a panel was charged by the provost and the vice president for student life to actually create a plan for adopting or achieving this goal. In September of 2016, the panel produced an action plan which included an extensive effort to create the procedures involved. That would be included in a final report. The final report was done 2 years later. It was a very comprehensive process that we went through. About a year later, the administration approved implementation of that plan. And then just a few months later, the pandemic hit. And so, you know, there's good news and bad news here. The good news is that we put together an amazing plan. The bad news is that after 5 years plus, we're kind of in a holding pattern in terms of implementation. So operating within a huge university has its advantages and its disadvantages, but one of them is that one of the disadvantages is you can't work quickly on something like this. This is the leadership team. You see are the people that were involved. You'll see I was part of the 3-person leadership team that included the head of dining services and a representative from undergraduate student government. In addition to that, there were nearly 50 students, faculty, staff involved, 6 academic departments, 5 administrative. We had monthly meetings, concurrent work groups. We considered 22 external perspectives so that we could learn what we needed to pull together a plan. Lilian, by the way, was one of those 22, and she offered us some very valuable information. Excuse me, let me take a drink. So these are the 3 guiding principles that the panel adopted right off, and I think that they're relevant to anybody that's doing this. We wanted, even though the goal was to achieve a certain percentage of purchasing that might be local or sustainable, we adopted our own goal that we wanted 100% transparency so that we could know where all of the food comes from and as much as possible about how it's produced. So we weren't satisfied with just saying that we wanted to affect a small portion of the food. We also were interested in implementing continuous improvement, which means that whatever we achieve, even if we got to the 40%, that we would go beyond that. And we wanted to assure that a diversity of opinions, perspectives, and even a diversity of food was included in the ultimate plan. And so those were our 3 guiding principles, and I'd have to say that we did a good job of sticking with all of those. I'm just going to tell you as quickly as possible some of the key things that we decided, so that hopefully this will help inform the discussion to follow. And that is, I'm going to talk a little bit more about local, but we decided that local is not a one-dimensional concept, that it actually is multi-dimensional. It means different things to different people. We came up with an instrument we call the Buckeye Bullseye, which I will show you in just a moment. For sustainable, we decided that we are not, at the university, can decide who's sustainable and who's not, but we would rely on third-party certifications that met certain criteria, and that within those certifications that we insisted on 5 categories that could be addressed by the producers of food that was coming into the university, and those categories are economic, environmental, workers' rights, the treatment of workers in general, animals, animal welfare, for instance, and the impact on communities. So we actually interviewed many certifiers and evaluated them in terms of their objectivity and how they fit these 5 categories. So some of them would meet 1 or 2 categories, for instance. Very few of them met all 5. But in order to call food sustainable, we're insisting that at least 2 of these categories are satisfied through third-party certification. 1 of those had to be environmental. We considered that to be primary. And if it happened to be animals, animal products involved, that the second category must be animal welfare. So our aim was for food to meet 3, 4, or 5 categories, but those were the minimum expectations to be able to consider something sustainable. This last category was really important. We created it. We weren't asked to, but we realized that we did not want to call products that were merely processed within the range of what we would call local as being local product. So for instance, there's a significant amount of coffee that is consumed at the university and at all universities, and there's a very significant amount of that coffee that is actually roasted by a company in Columbus. So we did not want to consider that to be local, just based on the fact that a local company was involved with processing it. But we did want to be able to give credit to the fact that money was being spent with an Ohio-based company. So we created this 3rd category of interest in order to give credit where credit is due for Ohio-based businesses that are providing processed food. So that raises the question, what is local? Here is the Buckeye Bullseye. And I said that we recognize that there are different ways to think about local. If you talk to the average student, they're likely to say that local means something coming from a farm that you could easily drive to, let's say within 50 miles. So we wanted to give credit to food that was produced within 50 miles of one of our campuses. Secondly, we were very interested, and of course, Columbus is at the middle of Ohio, so that's convenient, but we were interested in being able to give credit to food that came from Ohio, was produced in Ohio. And then we used as our outer definition of local, a circle within 275 miles. Many large universities use a standard of 250 miles. That's the standard used by the Real Food Generation, which used to be called the Real Food Challenge. But the 275 actually is established in federal law now, and I was involved in actually getting this into the statute with the Food Safety Modernization Act. That's the cutoff for certain exemptions for food that's produced in terms of the food safety requirements that producer has to meet. And then we were very interested in food that comes from within North America. So whereas that coffee that is roasted in Columbus, we weren't willing to call it local, we were interested to know what coffee we were buying that was sourced from North America. I had an administrator ask me at one point, Brian, why would we care if the food comes from North America? And at the time, and this is true now too, we were having a very severe problem at the southern border with immigration. And I said, you have to understand that our purchasing habits with respect to where food comes from, including Central America and the Caribbean, which is included in the definition of North America here, has a lot to do with what you see happening at the border. So we're a big university and we're taking a big view on this. The fact is we want to generate numbers in each of these rings and even be able to show it as kind of a heat map with sourcing moving toward the center of this bullseye. Now, this is what the bullseye actually looks like when you consider the 4 campuses that Ohio State has that provide food. And so this is a very realistic view of what we're dealing with. That 275-mile ring, you'll notice, goes through downtown Chicago and hits Washington, D.C. on the other side. And I'm going to come back to this later. But we take very seriously that this range not only can provide the vast majority of food that the university purchases if we wanted it to, but also this is the range of influence in terms of what a food system region might look like from the perspective of Ohio State. Like I said, I would like to come back to that later. Here's a couple topics of interest that we covered. And that is students were very interested in talking about whether genetically modified organisms or products coming from CAFOs would be considered sustainable. And our answer to this is that we're going to remain flexible with it, but that because we're relying on third-party certifiers, that our criteria is clear, that those products would need to meet the criteria of those third-party certifiers as I spelled out before. So most of it might not meet that criteria right now, whether it's genetically modified or coming from a CAFO, but that's not saying that the science might not advance at some point where certifications may actually overlap into those areas. So we did not slam the door on these kinds of products, but we did reach a very good solution on it. And then this is the other one. Because we had Lilian come and talk to us, we were tipped off about the problem with soft drinks. And it was very fortunate. We did a little study on this and found out that Ohio law already distinguishes between soft drinks and other foods. Specifically, the Ohio Revised Code 5739, which is in the tax code, defines soft drinks as not being food. And that was like an aha moment for us because he said, we are not going to count soft drinks as food. We're not going to give ourselves credit ever for where the soft drinks come from or how they're processed. It simply is not food, and that's very consistent with the kinds of health values that we were also wanting to promote. So here's some key data. the total spend as best we could figure it, and that's difficult, believe me, to come up with a total number in a complex university, but it's around $33.5 million in fiscal year 2017. You see that it went down a little bit in fiscal year 2018, but that was because, and it shows you the effect of taking soft drinks out of the number. So it gives you an idea how much money is spent on soft drinks in that purchase. It accounts for those four campuses that were in the map. And this is only focusing on the products that were easy to count. And that is, and by the way, this is just on the local, this is only on the local criteria, not the sustainable criteria. But so fresh meat, dairy, yogurt, tomatoes, lettuce, things like that, that we were at about 9.5% in fiscal year 2017, and that boosted a little bit in fiscal year 2018. But I have to say, Ohio State includes a massive medical center. We have big stadiums that are involved with food. And these numbers just come from the student dining portion of the total budget, and it only covers those products that you read about there. So it's a very, very limited look at what we were able to achieve. We do need better data mechanisms, and that's one of the points that we made in our plan. So our key recommendations were that we need a standing governance body to continue to make decisions over time about, for instance, what third-party certifiers are qualified. We do need to build our work into the curriculum of the university. We do need good funding sources in order to continue pursuing the goal, and particularly to put the information systems in place, which is probably the key need for money right off the bat. And then we also understood that maintaining good relationships outside the university was quite important. So I'm essentially done. I did want to come back to this map and say that I think that the solution for all of us is to think on a regional basis and find ways to work together. This can't be simply a matter of one university competing with another in order to be able to say which one buys the most local food or the most sustainable food. And when you see that 275-mile ring, you can see that from our perspective, our region includes University of Kentucky, certainly Ohio University, but also even like Pitt and Penn State and Michigan State and Indiana University and Purdue, and even that ring hits Champaign, Illinois over there. So it really makes sense to us that we find ways to collaborate and to think of this as a region, and each university could have the same kind of bullseye around them geographically to think about their region that they want to serve and connect with. And I would urge us to move toward a regional sensibility, regional consciousness, and find ways to work together, because ultimately that is what is going to draw the major institutions into a program that makes sense, is if we have a collaborative spirit and ways of sort of challenging each other in a cooperative way. So that's the end of my presentation, and I would be very happy to take questions later.
All right.
Let me see if I can figure out how to get out of full screen mode or sharing mode. It was pretty straightforward before when I did it.
All right. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate the insight. And hopefully during the open discussion or a question and answer series, we can get to discussing improved collaboration and your concept or your idea with that. Okay. So
am I out of screen sharing?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yep. You're good. So next up on the docket, we have a slideshow for the Ohio Farm, and our graduate student intern, Tiffany Harvey. I'm going to have her bio here and then introduce her, and then she's going to give us a slideshow. Tiffany Harvey is the Farm to Ohio Rural Action and Culinary Services Certification Coordinator, graduate assistant, and this summer she is an intern at the Ohio Student Farm. Her role with the Farm to Ohio initiative includes collaborating with Rural Action to expand GAP certification acres through outreach to local farmers, maintaining and pursuing GAP certification. She is also responsible for maintaining GAP certification at the Ohio Student Farm, which contributes to the local produce procurement by Ohio University Culinary Services and provides GAP certified example for farmers interested in obtaining the certification. Tiffany holds a Bachelor of Science in Agricultural Education and Extension from West Virginia University and is currently pursuing a Master of Science in Environmental Studies from Ohio University. Her graduate leadership practicum includes locating land of high conservation value with GIS for Athens Conservancy, and her hobbies include thrifting, canoeing, hiking, and goats are her favorite animal because she raised them as a kid. Please welcome Tiffany Harvey.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the introduction. I'm trying to share right now. Just a moment, it's loading. I don't.
We can see it, Tiffany.
Okay, and for me, it's in presentation view, so I was very confused. But okay. So again, my name is Tiffany Harvey, and I am a graduate student at Ohio University. And my graduate assistantship involves working at the student farm. And part of my role there has been making sure that it maintains its GAP certification. And the reasoning for that is that a lot of produce from the Ohio Student Farm is procured by OU Culinary Services. And also it provides a good GAP example for local farmers to see and tour. So some general background information about the farm. So it was originally started in the early 1970s. And back then it was a learning garden. And there were also a lot of student community plots that were there. Something really unique about the student farm is that it's very closely located to the OU campus. A lot of school farms are not very close to the campus, but OU is within walking distance for a lot of students. So that's a huge benefit. And prior to its acquisition by OU, it was leased to local farmers. And up until 2015, it was a community garden for mostly plant biology students. And after 2015, it started becoming more production focused, and it has doubled in size ever since. And its most profitable year was about $12,000. It is mostly organic, but not entirely. It is, but it's not certified either. So we mostly do not, we don't use any chemicals or pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, but we're not certified as organic either. There are a lot of educational opportunities for students at the farm. So it serves as a research site. Just recently, we had a student doing research on soil amendments for kale and spinach. And there are a few other research projects also going on in addition to. It serves as an outdoor laboratory for environmental and plant biology courses, and those are listed there. Specifically sustainable agriculture. Typically within non-COVID pandemic times, there would be sustainable agriculture students who would each get a plot at the farm, and they would be responsible for growing their own crops during the time when they were in the course. There's also a lot of opportunities for OU internships and community work study opportunities. Right now we have 3 community work studies, and we're getting some more internships later. And in the spring, we also had some interns as well. And several different courses also tour the farm. And the freshmen come and visit with their learning community, which is analogous to like freshman orientation courses at other universities. And it's a great volunteer opportunity for sororities, fraternities, clubs, and individual students. The student farm also donates to quite a few different food pantries and food banks. Specifically, it donates to Cat's Cupboard, which is the OU student pantry. And we also do some deliveries to international students. And just in 2019, we donated 500 pounds of produce. And in 2020, we donated 1,464 pounds of produce. And Community Food Initiatives is a food aggregation nonprofit that gets food to people in need of it. We also have a partnership with Rural Action. We send a lot of produce to the Chester Hill Produce Auction, which you may have already heard about. Last year, we earned $2,968.98. And there are also some summer vistas that come and work at the farm to help out during the harvest or anything like that. The student farm's role with the Farm to Institution is to produce product for culinary services and also provide, as an example, for farmers pursuing GAP, as I mentioned before. So there are a lot of different GAP protocols and procedures and policies in place at the farm. We are still improving our implementation of GAP ourselves. And you will see a little bit of that later. So just recently, we put in a kiosk at the entrance of the farm, which is here. And this kiosk is intended to let visitors know about the GAP protocols and procedures that they're expected to follow. And they're also supposed to sign in here just so we know who is coming to the farm. And that's good for like traceability purposes, or if there was some kind of contamination that happened. And there's also some emergency contact information there as well. And here is a closer picture of, or a close-up picture of the kiosk. It was just recently put in. And again, it has the rules posted, sign in. We have a map that clearly shows where the hand washing station is. That is a major thing with GAP implementation. You have to really drive it home that people need to wash their hands when they arrive. So our hand washing station is at the entrance to the Circle Garden, which is here. It is absolutely beautiful. Someone is taking, someone's advancing my slides. Anyway. Okay. So we have different signs on our hand washing station. Our hand washing station is pretty low tech. We just have a jug of water on a stand that you just like unscrew the thing and you wash your hands. And there's a bucket under here to catch the water. And we have paper towels up here and signage to tell people to put their paper towel in there. And then our produce rinse station is here. The main purpose for it is to rinse off soil, specifically mostly for carrots and potatoes, and to reduce microbial risk by rinsing off the produce. This is something that is a work in progress. We need to put up bird netting to keep birds from resting here and then pooping on the rinse station. And there will also be plastic going up around it as well, around all the walls, I guess you would say, except for the front will remain open. Yeah. And then there is a portable toilet here, and that's really important. You have to provide your workers and people visiting with a place to use the bathroom for GAP certification, because if you don't, you're running a risk that they will just go to the bathroom where they shouldn't be. So there is a portable toilet here and a hand washing station. And again, there must be signage for reminding people to wash their hands, and it has to be cleaned every week. We have a red barn where we have the storage of a lot of our stuff. You have to keep a record of weekly cleanings. You have to check rodent traps every week. This is where our glove policy is. Our gloves are here, the clean ones are here, and the dirty ones go in the gray one. And we also keep our packing materials here, and that stuff is sectioned off with plastic curtains to reduce contamination. And then we have a specific area for worker belongings and a first aid kit, and we have a maintenance log that we keep anytime we do maintenance on like the rototiller or something. And all of these things are examples of GAP certification things that have to be in place. And if you want more information on that, you can find it at, where did my presentation go? Am I out of time?
Hi, Tiffany. No, you're not out of time. I think somebody has taken over your presentation. So I'm not really sure what has happened.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Would you like for me to pull up your screen, your slides again, or would you like to try from your share screen? I think you just need to reshare your presentation, maybe.
That is
Okay.
just
I'm
reshare.
trying.
Awesome.
There we go.
Okay, my apologies. This has never happened before. I don't know what's happening.
Yeah, that's a first for us. So very sorry.
Okay, where was it? All right. So we also have a high tunnel where we have some more GAP things. We keep all of our signage here. Once again, a lot of the signage is the same that's located at the barn and also at the kiosk. And we also will eventually keep our harvesting and packing log here, and our harvesting and our planting and harvesting log. And those are really important for traceability. And I was saying before, if you want more detailed information on GAP, the USDA has a very detailed checklist that you can go through on your own to make sure that your university's farm is covering all of these different things. And the last thing I want to mention is that your workers have to have a break area outside of the farm. So ours is located out here next to the road. And right now we have our picnic tables stacked on top of each other. So you get to sit up really high whenever you take a break. But yeah, that was the last thing I wanted to mention. And yeah, that concludes my tour of the farm. If you have any questions, just let me know. And thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Tiffany. And thank you for all your work out at the farm and the GAP certification for the fall group. We do appreciate. Okay, we'd kind of like to move it now to a question and answer session, and then also open discussion. So if there's anything else that anybody would like to bring up or discuss, I know Brian had a concept that we could definitely discuss for a while. And then also Lilian put some things in the chat. It might be nice to kind of know what those were. And so Let's start with questions, and if there aren't any questions, then we'll move to maybe Lilian can describe what she put in the chat for us. Don't be shy. I know you're out there.
Hi, Kent, if I may, if folks would like to go ahead and turn on your cameras so this could be more interactive. That way we can see folks and you can ask your questions. Just a reminder, you can put all of your questions in the chat, or if you would like to go ahead and ask them, you can raise your hand using the raise hand feature and we will call upon you. And Ken, it looks like you have some questions coming up in the chat now.
Okay, this one's from Stephanie Corbett. And the question is, what types of food does OU Student Farm specifically sell to the dining halls? What are a few of the top products sold? So in the past, we've had a lot of jalapeno peppers that we used from Art. We've also had wheatgrass that we did for smoothies, and also cherry tomatoes were a very popular item. So those are some of the higher volume items. We were working with the farm a couple years ago to try to produce more spinach, and especially in the tunnels for that mid to late April season, right before our students left, is what we were working with them before the COVID hit. So, okay. Any other questions? Lilian, would you mind discussing a little bit about the links that you put in the chat for everyone?
Happy to. So the first link, and I'm not totally clear on who can see what, but for those who might be interested in farm and institution metrics and learning how you can integrate those into your dining service program or your research efforts or your community organizing work, that's the first link, ftimetrics.localfoodeconomics.com. There you'll find a deep dive into our metrics, some how-tos, some plug and play spreadsheets and tools that you can use. We've got a Google data dashboard going up soon. So lots of stuff there and ways to join the metrics collaborative. So we've got 40 states involved. We've got some cool pilots happening. So that's that. And then the other one is the Food Connections website. If you're interested in seeing our dining reports, those are listed there under publications. Our social media feeds are, if you just want to see what kinds of programming a center like this can do or get some good recipes, just encourage you to find us there. We have I don't know why you'd want to be, maybe you're in Kentucky, you want to be in our newsletter, you can join it there, and it's a great way to connect with us.
I know one thing that's helped us promote the Farm to Ohio Working Group is CFI, Community Foods Initiative, and so they were sharing recipes with us so that we could post them on our social media as well. And I think recipes are a great way to connect to the customer, to the students as well. Okay. Erin mentioned that different types of foods were sold in the retail locations at OU, that there were different types of opportunity in those venues. Just curious what types of products were the focus there. And so at Jefferson Marketplace, and Don, I see Don's on the call. I might tap into him. Don Jackson is he's now an associate director at Vanderbilt, but he used to be here at Ohio University, and he assisted with starting up the Jefferson Marketplace here at Ohio University. And Jefferson Marketplace is a market. And so we do have quite a bit of produce that we sell as retail there. And so some of the items I was discussing before are exactly those items. You know, we did use a lot of jalapenos there. We used cherry tomatoes. We did have green peppers. He did do some kale for us, as well as some leaf lettuce. So those early spring items were some of the things we focused on. And then in the fall, we did have some potatoes that Art grew for us, as well as some sweet potatoes. So those are mostly the items, and we did that at those retail locations. Now, we also, for the Uniquely Ohio, we had We've done different honeys from around the region. We have different jams, blackberry jams and jellies from a local here in Ohio. So those are some of the things we've done with that as well. Yep. And David, thank you for confirming the OU farm is growing potatoes this year. Awesome. So how are things in Vanderbilt, Don?
Well, we shut down an hour and 15 minutes ago, so good.
Funny. So I think your director of sustainability was on yesterday, Suzanne.
Erin, yes.
Yes. Yeah. Good conversation.
Yes.
Brian,
so if I could talk a little bit about what I'm hoping we might be able to do.
Good.
You know, I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation that there was a lot of student pressure at the beginning of our journey. And it's not just a coincidence that over the long period of time that it took us to pull together a plan and get it approved, and then lost momentum on the project, that the students that were very interested in seeing us do this were, of course, now gone. And they were not necessarily replaced by other students that had the same interest. And I think that every university is subject to some variables like this. Sometimes the student body is very interested in where food comes from. Sometimes they're less interested. It often is the case that food service companies, as Lilian was describing, that are hired to provide the dining services are given the job of implementing some kind of strategy for local purchasing or sustainable purchasing, and they all have different ways of defining that, different ways of being able to meet what they understand to be the obligations of their contracts. These things vary, and I really think that the best strategy for us to get something done consistently, and I'll just be frank about it, I mean, the best way for Ohio State to have an incentive to be involved in this is to be working with other universities that have the same objectives in mind. I'll also then apply that point to the fact that, you know, we have a student farm. Some of the things grown at the student farm are served in dining halls. It's fairly symbolic, similar to the purchases made from some very local farms. It's a symbolic gesture. It might be significant to those farms, but actually very insignificant when compared to the total purchase that the university makes. I think what we all want is to affect the big contracts in order to really move the food system in a direction that all of us would be interested in seeing it move. And I don't think that there is going to be any way of really doing that without working together. So that, you know, if we're looking for very large meat or milk contracts, or even, you know, they're increasingly indoor growing options for produce being installed, both in Kentucky and Ohio that I'm aware of. If we're going to be moving toward very significant contracts of buying local product like that, I think we can have a bigger effect on the market if we have multiple institutions pushing for the same thing. I'd be interested in hearing Lilian's thoughts on that, but really anybody on the call.
Yeah, I'm with you, Brian. I mean, we only have the program we have today because Kentucky keeps us accountable. You know, Wildcats love UK, and that we have a commitment to our Commonwealth. But as I say candidly to my students and others, anyone who listen, I don't actually care about local food, which is a radical thing to say. But what I care about are equitable, accessible, resilient food systems that provide a reasonable livelihood to producers, that promote healthful eating for all of our community members. And to my mind, the best way to achieve that is through embedded transparent, democratic, and equitable food systems. So if we hold our public institutions accountable to their responsibility to the public good and to the commons, procurement's an incredible way to do that. I mean, we're only moving, our farm impact purchasing is 10% of the overall food spend, but that's, that's millions of dollars. And so for our farmers and of this scale, it makes a big difference. And if we continue to move the needle and the reinvestments that can happen in our economy, that's everything. And so we're proving the value of mid-tier infrastructure. We've got mid-tier meat processing in the state. We've got an expansion of on-site milling for grains. I mean, right now we're working on, this is a perfect example. We are working on a farm impact bread product, either a hamburger bun. We're also looking at loaf bread that will actually be baked in Cincinnati, so technically in Ohio, from Kentucky grown grains. That's a product that we can all get behind. It's going to be baked by an independent baker. We're rebuilding value chains that have been dismantled over the course of decades, where we've focused on global commodity exchange and blah blah blah. So welcome to food systems. So like this is the long con. This is the work of redemocratizing and re-embedding the system so that it's accountable to the public good rather than private profit. I mean, that's a very candid take on it, so don't quote me. I'm curious to hear others' thoughts.
No. Well, this is only being recorded, so don't worry.
Oh, no.
We can't hold you to anything.
But I think something you said has to be emphasized, and that is we all love ultra-local food, and yet that's often used as a symbolic stand-in for the food system change that's really needed. And we all need to understand that.
Yeah.
Because like I said, I'm even interested in where the coffee comes from and where the avocados come from and the bananas and the pineapple. Because if we want to have a more just society and don't want thousands and thousands of people showing up at the border that are destitute and have no other options, we need to be concerned about whether or not we're actually supporting their farming systems in Central America. Is the coffee we're purchasing, and of course it's not going to come from Ohio or Kentucky, but is it coming from, let's say, bird-friendly sources in Nicaragua, Guatemala, and Costa Rica? Because those bird-friendly sources down there govern the ability for the songbirds in our region to go down and come back the next year, and not to keep diminishing in number. I mean, there's some incredible factors involving Central America and the Caribbean that actually affect our economic life here, and certainly the politics of the country. So it's important that we build systems that take all these things into account and move toward greater and greater economic justice and democratization. As Lilian put it, I think that's a very good way to understand it.
We do have two questions in the chat, and Brian, the first one, Elaine Getz would like to know, how exactly could the institutions push together for larger contracts for local foods, and would that be a contract through the IUC?
Well, certainly institutions are free to form their own consortiums. And I'm currently involved in a conversation of several universities, most of them smaller than Ohio State, of course, because Ohio State is, by quite a measure, the largest university in Ohio, about the fact that we could develop that overused term of a food hub, where we're collectively investing in the kinds of infrastructure needed to be able to collect and store and distribute food. As we talk to food service providers at the various campuses, they all say, I want one place I can go and get this. I don't want 20 pickup trucks backing up to the kitchen. And so that means it kind of puts it on us, and it can't be that every university has its own set of infrastructure to make that happen. the only way to really make that happen is that we invest together in the kinds of infrastructure that, as Lilian said, that has been dismantled over decades.
I'll offer that. So our salad bar program, which I didn't have a chance to talk about, was initially coordinated through, again, a Cincinnati base, because Cincinnati's got a lot going on. Food Hub, Local Food Connection. They were able to, and they're still servicing that area. They were able to grow the program and demonstrate their capacity to serve institutional markets, in part because UK Dining Aramark had to figure out a way to work with them because their broadline distributors can't and won't do the sort of local procurement that they need. And I think dining service providers and distributors are recognizing that to have a competitive advantage in an evolving food market, they have to be able to do local in some way that's meaningful. So they grew enough that Creation Gardens, also known as What Chefs Want, which is a Kentucky-based regional distributor, acquired them. So they're now sort of a quasi-subsidiary within Creation Gardens, but they still have locations all over the place. They still have their Cincinnati facility. And I could see those sorts of initiatives growing where these secondary regional produce distributors in particular recognize that their expertise isn't in local procurement, but they need to have that expertise. And so we can build these strategies. And that's one of the reasons, building the capacity of the food system value chain as a whole, as Brian's speaking to, that's where we're at. We don't buy from our university farm. A lot of folks are like, why don't you buy from your certified organic farm? Because we're out here trying to make markets for farmers. Our campus farm, it's amazing. They run a CSA, but we intentionally stay out of the market to create that space. Because if we're buying from ourselves, we're not doing the work that at least a land grant institution can and should be doing. And so having that mindset of really growing the infrastructure, the value chains, demonstrating proof of concept so that other institutions have, to be real, that there's no excuse not to do it, right? The price is right, the systems are there, it's a one-stop shop, like you can't keep saying no. The piece I did get to talk to is knowing the difference between when someone tells you, oh, we can't do that, when what they actually mean is, oh, we won't do that. And understanding the underlying incentives, barriers, but also pressure points behind farm to institution procurement helps you discern the difference between the two. Because sometimes it really is, we can't do it. Like they don't have a gap audit, we're required to do that. But sometimes it's, we don't want to. And we have to get around those.
Yeah, and so let me say also that as a great example of something that we could do together, if Ohio State and Ohio University and University of Kentucky, and let's throw in the University of Cincinnati and even Pitt, if they all decided together that we were going to insist on one thing, and that is that all of the food that our suppliers bring have a zip code listing on it, as to where the food came from. And of course, suppliers are going to say, oh my gosh, milk, do you even understand milk? Because that comes from 100 zip codes. It's like, yeah, right. So we do understand because this is just like a mutual fund. We have the science, we have the ability to do the math. We could be on a load of milk. We could be saying, here's the percentages that have come from various zip codes. If we all said we wanted that on every invoice, we would get it. There is no question that we would get it because individually we're big buyers. Collectively, we're huge. Mm-hmm. And if we said we want zip code data on every piece of food that comes in, we would get it. So all we need, I say all like it's simple, is administratively for a group of universities to agree that they want that thing and probably 2 or 3 other things.
I will, and along those lines, Brian, with the Farm Institution Metrics Collaborative and this pilot work that we're doing, Aramark Corporate is now responding by integrating those metrics because while the definitions of local might change, as long as we're working with the same metrics building blocks to define it, then they're like, okay, that's all we want. We can't do bespoke local definitions and tracking for every account. But if you all agree to use the same, at least metric, we can track that. So they're building in their Open Fields platform, building the metrics in, and we've put that pressure. So some of the, at a national level, that infrastructure is starting to seep in. So your strategy is absolutely right.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah, I mean, we have a huge data institute at Ohio State that would love to work on
Yes, let's do it.
on a project like this.
Brian, there's another question in the chat, and so Stephanie Corbett wants to know how much did the Real Food Challenge program drive the initiative at Ohio State University in the beginning? And is there an Ohio or regional working group focused on higher education, sustainable food procurement collaboration with folks who are on this panel and or others?
So that's two questions. So the Real Food Challenge was key, not necessarily in designing the program. Ohio State chose not to sign up with the Real Food Challenge, and that was very controversial at the time. But that helped to drive the fact that there was a panel of folks charged with coming up with a plan. And that happened to happen within a week or two of when I started. So I ended up in a leadership role. Without the Real Food Challenge, we would not have taken that step. And I know that those students felt like they failed in some ways, but I reassured them then and would reassure them now that what they did actually created the circumstances for us to move ahead. The problem is that students seem less aware now of the whole issue. And that's a conundrum. I don't understand exactly why there's less interest, but I think you could look at the fact that there's a lot of other things to be concerned about in our society right now. So there's a lot of competition.
So maybe like you're saying, Brian, it comes down to the administration and us making those decisions and trying to collaborate. Then it has to be driven. I often make the point that universities do not delegate authority well, and this is a case where top administration needs to delegate specific authority to somebody within each institution to be talking to other institutions and to come up with a plan for how we could collaborate on the data. And I think that really is the key. Let's get the metrics and the data that's the same. You can use 100 miles. We can use 275 miles. You can use 50 miles. Let's get the zip codes on there. And then we can all apply our own standards. Let's get the data consistent. Now, on the other question, I will say that there is not, at least we're not part of an Ohio-based consortium yet, but that is in the works. And I think state lines are a problem. I think international boundaries are a problem. The fact that our 275 miles goes into Canada, it doesn't bother me. It's like, okay, so Canada's a neighbor. Let's think about how we can collaborate as part of a regional effort, however we want to define that region. And that's what I'm interested in doing. So anybody within hearing distance that wants to participate in that can certainly let me know, and we can try to figure it out. Yep. Sounds good. Okay.
I think, I have to bounce.
Yeah.
This has been a really great, I'm loving this conversation, and we have an awards ceremony I have to get to.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining. I think we're going to wrap it up. If you can, please join us tomorrow for session 3. We have planning for strong community and institutional partnerships. Thank you for joining today. It's been great conversation, and Brian will be in touch. All right. Thank you.
Sure. Great. Thank you.